Today we'll be dealing with 6 subsections, and with those 6 subsections we will conclude this topic. Now, the boxers had developed their own organizational setup. It will be better if we can make a brief comparison between the boxer organization and the Taiping rebels. Now, Taiping rebellion, that is the period from 1851 to 1864. Now, in the case of the Taiping rebellion, there was a central command, meaning there was a central leader, Hung Siu Chuang by name, who was a school teacher by profession, poverty-stricken school teacher. And there were some regional commands. There was a hierarchy. But in the case of the Boxer rebellion, for various reasons, there was no such hierarchy, no such central command, only regional commands. As for example, let us say in Shantung, there was a person named Zhu who was a seller of plasters. And there was another Ben Ming in the same province. Then in Chile, there was Zhang, who was a former boatman. So that was the organizational setup of the Boxers. The Boxer rebellion was, of course, a peasant rebellion. But apart from the peasants, there were also people from various walks of life who took an active part in it. There were laborers, boatmen, the artisans who were thrown out of employment because of the coming of foreign goods, textile goods. So Chinese weavers, Chinese spinners, they became unemployed. Hundreds and thousands of them were thrown out of work. And there were soldiers who had been dismissed from the army. Then there were monks, gentry, members of the gentry, Shensi. They were also there. There were also some local officials who were very much anti-foreign. So people from all these sections of the Chinese society took an active part in a rebellion. Now, it was this diverse social composition which also left an imprint on their political program. And their political program was manifested in their banners, in their leaflets, in their proclamations, in their songs, folk songs. Now, there are 2 aspects in the Boxer rebellion. One definitely was the anti-foreign aspect. We have pointed out that it was basically anti-missionary. We have one declaration which read as follows: "We are learning the sacred devices of fist fighting to defend China and drive out the overseas plunderers." Fist fighting because they practiced boxing and oath-taking. They were also against Chinese converts, Chinese who had been converted into Christianity. And there is another statement which shows that these Chinese Christian converts were regarded as traitors to the nation. If there are still Christians in any village, they should be driven out at once, and the churches and other premises belonging to them should be burned to ashes. That was again their declaration. So this anti-foreign aspect was clearly evident in their statements made from time to time. Another important aspect was the participation of women. On the last occasion, we pointed out that women participated in large numbers, huge numbers, probably unlike in any other country, any other feudal society of the world. And there were detachments of women, detachments which were given names, red lanterns for girls between 12 and 18, blue lanterns for middle-aged wives, then black lanterns for older wives, and green lanterns for widows. While referring to the participation of women in large numbers, Chénaud, the French historian, pointed out that the Chinese society was faced with so much crisis, particularly the rural society, that there was a creation of a huge body of floating population of women, homeless women. Homes broke down because of poverty. And one definitely they became prostitutes, no doubt about it. But there was another section from among the homeless women who joined secret societies. And of course, during times of rebellion, they played a positive role in rebellion. So we can explain the participation of women by this factor. This has been pointed out by Chénaud. And they had also their military setup, as for example, in battle 10 fighters formed a squad, and there was a squad leader, of course. 10 squads formed a brigade, and there was a brigade leader also. In this way it went on. Initially, the Boxers were regarded as a group which were engaged in self-defense, and they actually posed no threat to the state initially. However, as the movement spread, it soon became an anti-dynastic, meaning anti-Manchu dynasty, and anti-foreign rebellion. It started in October 1898 in Guangxian, but this was ultimately suppressed by the Manchus. But by 1900, a large area encompassing the Baoding Tianjin region came under their control. Peking became one of the important centers of the Boxer rebellion, and the rebels also took control over Hunan, Shanxi, Inner Mongolia, Northwest, and other parts. North China, Northwestern China, Central China, South China. So many parts of China came under the influence or under the control of the Boxer rebellion. So actually the whole country was in turmoil. Now, one of the main slogans of the Boxers, of course, was exterminate the foreigners. Since foreigners were their main targets of attack, so they raised the slogan exterminate the foreigners. And there was a banner which they raised in Shantung, which was the main center of the Boxer rebellion. From Shantung, the rebels spread to other parts of the country. One of the posters read as follows: "Most bitterly do we hate the treaties which harm the country and bring calamities on the people. High officials betray the nation. Lower ranks follow suit. The people find no redress for their grievances." So it is quite clear why they made the foreigners and their local collaborators their main targets of attack. Early June 1900, the slogan exterminate the foreigners, it filled the city of Peking. They operated in groups like between 30 and 50 groups, and with their shoes and socks decorated with red colors, red borders. They took to the streets with swords or long spears openly, and they were joined by handicraftsmen and other working people. Apart from the exterminate the foreigner slogan that they raised was the boycott of foreign goods. This is very important because they raised a slogan for the boycott of foreign goods many years before. In Bengal, during the time of the anti-partition campaign, people raised a slogan of the boycott of foreign goods. So boycott of foreign goods and consumption of indigenous goods, these were the two slogans which were simultaneously raised by the Boxers. And it is quite natural that these reflected the aspirations of the handicraftsmen, artisans, or national industrialists. When the Boxers rose in Shantung, people in other parts of the country, they were also influenced. In Tianjin, people spontaneously, they organized a similar movement. They distributed posters, they spread propaganda in the form of folk sayings, etc. And they called upon the people to join anti-imperialist struggle. They also enlisted the support of the peasants in the countryside. Shrines were set up in various places, and military training was given to launch battles against imperialism, which of course began in right earnest. Now, armed struggle against foreign powers, that was one part of the movement, one type of reflection of national spirit. Now, other type of reflection of the same spirit can be found in the fact that when they met powerful members of society, officials, high officials, they held their heads high. They talked to them face to face, eye to eye, and it is said that when the Boxers met officials in the street, they would order the officials to those officials who had been riding on the sedan chairs to simply step down and stand on the street like in the way they were doing. Those who were on the horseback were ordered to dismount. So this was something which is unthinkable in a feudal society. Chinese society was a feudal and semi-colonial at that time. But that was a clear challenge to old feudal custom. So they had to face the wrath, the challenge of these Boxer rebels. And gradually, movements of this type, it spread. Those spread to many areas. In the face of this Boxer rebellion, the foreign governments naturally took alarm. And there were 8 powers who had been operating jointly against the Boxer rebels: Britain, the USA, France, Germany, Japan, Italy, and Austria-Hungary. These were the 8 powers who were very active. There were several reasons for their military intervention in China. The first of all, throughout this period, that is after the signing of the Treaty of Nanking, most of the foreign powers had extracted a large number of privileges. Now, if the Boxer rebellion was not suppressed, then all privileges would simply vanish, because the Boxer rebellion would undo all the gains that they acquired for themselves. That was the one reason. The second part was that if the Boxer rebellion was successful, then that would have serious repercussions in other colonies. China was still not a colony, direct colony, but it would have repercussions on colonies like India or colonies in other parts of the world. The third factor was that if they are able to suppress the Boxer rebellion, then they would be able also to exercise more control over the Manchus, so that they would then be able to extract more and more new privileges, new concessions from the weak Chinese government. So these were the 3 important considerations which impelled them to make a direct intervention, military intervention on behalf of the Manchus against the Boxer rebels. Now, at the beginning of August 1900, about 16,000 troops from all these countries, all these imperialist countries, they were concentrated in Tianjin, and there was a systematic slaughter and plunder of the rebel areas. Though there was stiff resistance from the rebels, the uprising ultimately came to an end. It was not possible for the rebels to stand up to the foreign challenge. The imperial palace was occupied by the foreigners, and most of its resources were plundered. All the powers were on a looting spree: USA, Britain, Russia, Japan, Germany, France, all of them. As for example, a large number of ancient bronzes, porcelains, jade objects, carvings, scientific instruments, books, paintings, all of which represented China's long national culture. They were looted, they were plundered. There was an encyclopedia known as the Yung Lo Encyclopedia. It had 307 volumes, and it belonged to the period of the Ming Dynasty, 15th century AD, which was again seized and plundered, as was the case earlier during the time of the Second Opium War, when these were again seized. Now, according to the Chinese sources, there were more than 46,000 rare books which were stolen by the invading armies. And the United Armies not only plundered, looted, they also murdered and raped. As for example, the head of the Allied Army, Walter C., he had to admit, unfortunately, the looting has not failed to be attended by other excesses: outrages on women, barbarities of all descriptions, murder, wanton acts of incendiarism, etc. This is a statement from the head of the Allied Army. So it was in this way that the wealth of the country, the precious treasures of the country, these were looted by the invading troops.
The Boxer rebels, you said they took over Peking. Then Peking was not the headquarters of the Manchu government.
The influence spread, and Peking became one of the centers of rebellion. That does not mean that they took over political control of the city of Peking. They did. No, okay. Not that. A protocol was signed. After the rebellion was crushed, a protocol was signed, which is known as the Protocol of 1901, was signed on 7 September. It was signed by representatives of the Qing or the Manchu government and by the envoys of 11 countries, not 8 countries, but 11 countries. Yes, 8 countries were involved in the actual military operation, but treaty was signed with envoys of 11 countries. And this protocol of 1901, like the other treaties signed earlier, is again one of the most humiliating treaties. And it is regarded as a deed of sale into slavery for China. There were 19 sections in the Protocol of 1901. We will refer to some of them. First, there was an extortion of an enormous indemnity. It's an unbelievable sum of 450 million taels. 450 million taels, TAEL, tael meaning 1 ounce of silver. That was to be paid over 39 years. And you should add to it the interest, which came to 980 million silver taels plus addition. And there were also local indemnities amounting roughly to 20 million taels of silver. The Protocol of 1901 provided that payment should be secured by 3 sources. One was the Maritime Customs, then Salt Tax Bureau, and the regular and native customs collected by the Qing government at land and water communication points or trade centers. The second is military supervision. The protocol stipulated that the Chinese government should raise all the forts between Taku and Peking, and that foreign troops be stationed at 12 strategic points along the railway line from Shanghai Kuan to Peking. Then the city of Tianjin, which was an important center of resistance, it was converted into a military base of the foreign powers, imperialist powers, for surveillance over the Manchu government. The third is establishment of the headquarters for aggression against China. The protocol stipulated that there should be the establishment in Peking of legation quarter. Legation quarter where Chinese would be debarred from living, foreign powers would come in, foreign troops would come in and be stationed there. And this naturally created a situation of a nation within a nation. Foreign enclaves were set up in large parts of China. It is not that during this period that foreign enclaves were created. Even starting from the time of the Treaty of Nanking, when many areas came under the control of different imperialist powers, where they enjoyed freedom, extraterritorial rights, and many other things. So foreign enclaves were created earlier, no doubt about it. But here we have the existence of foreign troops, foreign armed wing, which was not there to this extent. And in fact, the foreign powers naturally utilized these enclaves, foreign enclaves, as bases of operations against Chinese rebels, as also for interference in China's internal affairs. Fourth is the suppression of China's anti-imperial struggle, because that was the main problem before the foreign powers. According to the terms of the agreement, the Protocol of 1901, the chief offenders, quote-unquote offenders, of course, that is those who supported the VIII movement, those who took part in the VIII movement, they were punished either by death or by exile. Either they faced the gallows or they were exiled. And to penalize the scholars took part in large numbers. Examinations were suspended for 5 years in 45 districts, where the Boxers had been very much active. These were the main points in the Protocol of 1901. And it is quite clear that these protocol clauses, they constituted a flagrant interference in the domestic affairs of China. It meant that there was a huge drainage of wealth, finances from India, which of course retarded the economic development of the country to a large extent. And when foreign diplomatic officials were stationed in Peking, they became part of the super government. So China's sovereignty was no longer there. the Boxer Rebellion was not a long affair in comparison to the Taiping's rebellion which preceded it. And since it was a short-lived affair, the Boxers did not have the time to draw up a complete political and social program. They did not have the time to do so. Yes, they fought against foreigners, no doubt about it. And in fact, there were some secret societies, particularly White Lotus. White Lotus is a very important secret society. It aimed at overthrowing the Manchus, along with overthrowing foreign control, foreign powers. So both were there. But still there were some people, some among the Boxers, who were not anti-Manchu. All were anti-foreign, anti-missionary, but not all were anti-Manchu. White Lotus, of course, was anti-both. Coming to the social program of the Boxers, it was nothing more than a rudimentary distribution of wealth which was plundered by the rich. Distribution of wealth among the people. And since the Boxers, many of the Boxers were in alliance with the Manchus, so it also affected the expression of the social demands. Manchus represented the feudal society, but if there is an alliance at some points against their common enemy, imperialism was their common enemy, so it meant that they could not express their social demands, because if they were to express their social demands, that all those demands would have to be anti-feudal, anti-Manchu. So that was not there in all parts. So that was a limitation, no doubt. Now, one scholar who wrote on the Boxer Rebellion, he is Dunsteimer, he said that the Boxer Rebellion fell on a dividing line between two historical eras. One was the pre-industrial society, the medieval society, and the other was the modern society. The Boxer Rebellion was medieval in one sense because they had some medieval elements in it. Their use of the practice of charms taking, then oath taking, etc. And they also fought against modernism, if one can equate modernism with the coming of foreign powers. But when they fought against modernism, they had in fact been fighting against foreign colonialism. So, and in fact, that was the first fight of the 20th century against modern colonialism, since it took place on the dividing line between one century and another. And in fact, it was this pressure of the Boxer Rebellion that ultimately forced the foreign powers not to go on their project of slicing up the country. So the Boxer Rebellion in that sense was successful. To discuss the nature of the Boxer Rebellion very briefly, we can make a comparison with the Taiping Rebellion. Now, in the case of the Taipings, we can see that they were influenced by modern Christianity. Hung Siu-chuan, the leader of the Taipings, he adopted Christianity. But the Boxers were anti-Christians. Why this was so? Now, one probable reason was that the Taiping Rebellion took place mid-19th century and the Boxer Rebellion at the end of the 19th century. So, in the intervening period, Western encroachment became more prominent. The activities of the missionaries became more prominent during the time of the Boxers than it was during the time when Taiping Rebellion had been taking place. That is one explanation. Now, the Boxer Rebellion was basically anti-missionary. The Taiping Rebellion was basically anti-feudal, anti-Manchu. But both had the other two elements. In the case of the Taipings, it was also anti-foreign because they banned opium. And in the case of the Boxers also, they were also anti-Manchus. There were also anti-Manchu element in the Boxers. So what is primary in the case of the Boxers is secondary in the case of the Taipings, and what is primary in the case of the Taipings is secondary in the case of the Boxers.
Unlike the Taiping rebels, who had a central command, the Boxers only had regional command. Besides the peasants, the rebels came from artisans, boatmen, carters, porters, coolies, dismissed soldiers, priests, monks, shensi, and various declassed elements. They practiced boxing and oath-taking and believed in the use of charms. They formed their armed detachments, one branch of which consisted of women. Shantung, Chile, Peking, Tinsin, Shanxi, Inner Mongolia, Honan were some of the centers of rebellion. It was the military intervention by 8 foreign powers that crushed the rebellion. The imperialist armies plundered and looted property, raped and killed men and women. The Protocol of 1901 imposed on China a huge war indemnity, military supervision over many areas, set up headquarters for aggression against China, and penalized scholars. The Boxer Rebellion was the first great fight against modern colonialism. The rebels demonstrated the existence and strength of Chinese popular nationalism, and in the face of intense public opposition, the imperialist powers abandoned their intention of slicing up the territory of China.